everybody, and you're all very welcome to Newgrange for this, our live stream. Good morning, everybody. You're all very welcome to Newgrange this morning for this, our live stream of the Winter Solstice. We'll be here live over the next 3 mornings, and on behalf of the Office of Public Works and the National Monument Service of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, we want to welcome you all. We know that people are watching from all over the world. We've already had many messages of support, people texting, emailing, writing into us, telling us that they'll be here with us in spirit. So you're all very welcome. And if you have time while you're watching this morning or inclination, please tell us where you're watching from so that we can see how far this wonderful event reaches. It's not looking great here this morning, we have to admit, but we're always hopeful. We've had cloud on the horizon all this week, and it's not looking much better this morning, but it's not as foggy as it was yesterday. So we're here, and with me is my dear friend, Dr. Frank Prendergast, who's Ireland's leading archaeoastronomer, and he's going to talk us through the significance of the solstice and about the astronomy of this event. The big difference between our webcast this year and our webcast last year is whereas we still don't have people in the chamber, we have people on the outside, and we're delighted to see some old friends here this morning. And over the next 3 days, I'm sure we'll meet so many more of our old friends. So for all of you who are tuned in right around the world and here at Newgrange, a very good morning. So Frank, just to start the talk, and while we're waiting for the time of sunrise, can you tell us about the significance of the winter solstice?
There are 2 ways, Claire, of looking at the winter solstice. And if we take the scientific approach first, we know the Earth is rotating on a tilted axis once every 24 hours, and it takes a year for the Earth to orbit around the Sun and reach its return point. So that's one view, and both of those give us what's called the winter solstice. But if you take the Neolithic view, the prehistoric view, that's actually the best way of understanding the solstice, as it turns out. Because since we were here last year, the Sun has moved up the horizon to the summer solstice position, almost through a quarter of a circle, a huge distance along the horizon. Now it's back again. And it is that return of the Sun to its standstill position. And solstice means to stand still. And if you were to watch the Sun at the same location, day on day, for a couple of weeks before today, you would notice that sunrise is drifting inexorably towards a slowing down point, a stopping point, as far south as it will go. And that is, in effect, the winter solstice. And that moment, which lasts actually for several days, because to the naked eye, the sun appears to rise in the same position before it starts to return and move northwards again. So we have, in effect, a few days in which to enjoy the spectacle of winter solstice sunrise. And that was a time of year noticed by prehistoric farmers in our landscape here and elsewhere across the island and beyond, and was marked, there is no doubt about it. And that was expressed in the way that some of the tombs are aligned. So a small number of them were aligned in terms of the passage towards that stopping point of the sun on the horizon. And that is the significance of Newgrange. And we will talk more in detail about that later.
Yeah. What I always think is wonderful about being here at Newgrange is to know that people were here 5,000 years ago. There are very few places on the planet where you can gather for the same event as people did so long ago. And there's great continuity in that. And also there's a great message of resilience and strength. Like when they built their monument all those years ago, would they have ever dreamt, I wonder, that we would be here so far in the future? Sometimes I think, they built it to last forever, but what their concept of forever was escapes me. Like, it's very easy to say this monument was built 3,200 BC, over 5,000 years ago. But it's to imagine all the generations of people who have come and go, and all the different things that have happened in our prehistory and history, all the history that this monument has witnessed and all along the River Boyne. It's an extraordinary privilege to be here.
It really is.
Even if the sun isn't going to shine.
Yeah.
Because I often think the solstice is like Christmas Eve. It's the anticipation, it's the waiting for the light that is the exciting thing. And we don't always get what we hope for,
No.
but we're always excited.
Absolutely.
So it's echoed in like waiting for Christmas as
For
well.
sure,
Yeah.
for sure. What excites me about the Boyne Valley and other landscapes like this is that people were here long before the tomb was built in 3200 BC. So farming was going on in this region from as early as maybe about 4000 BC, which is incredible. So that's a full 800 years before this tomb was built and others like it. And the other thing to think about these great passage tombs is this was societies and community investing in the dead. Because what are they? They are places of the dead.
Yeah.
So we have to think about the primary role of these places in terms of the worldview, the belief system, and the traditions of the time. So burying the remains of the dead, perhaps an elite, inside these chambers, they were interred in terms of cremated remains and some bone. And all of that has been found. So from the archaeology, we know so much about the meaning of these tombs. And in another sense, we know so little because there is no written record. And to a certain extent, we have to interpret what is there.
Yeah. And we find what we want to find a lot of the time. And we're lucky to live in the time we are living in when we have such science to tell us so much. Like I often think when Professor O'Kelly started excavating here at Newgrange in the early 1960s, and he was at the forefront of archaeological techniques at the time. He was the first person who brought in other branches of science to his system, like pollen analysis. The date we got for Newgrange was the first date received in Ireland by radiocarbon dating.
Absolutely.
So this excavation marked a lot of firsts.
Yes.
And it is an extraordinary monument, but it's great that archaeologists can still go back to what Professor O'Kelly found and recovered and still get information out of it.
Correct.
It's like it's the monument that just keeps on giving. We keep saying that every year. We say there's something new to learn, and even in the future, there'll still be more information to be discovered.
Yeah. I mean, one of the principles in archaeology is sometimes to hold back on site investigations, mindful of the fact that in 10 years' time, 20 years' time, there will be new science and new technologies and new ways of investigating the materiality of what we have here. And that, for me, is wonderful.
Yeah.
And when we look at the facade of Newgrange in particular, we have a number of elements which stand out in terms of its architecture.
Yeah.
And if you look at that facade, you are impressed immediately, notwithstanding there is a degree of reconstruction and restoration about it, but we have in situ the famous entrance Kerbstone, labelled K1 by Professor O'Kelly. Behind it is the entrance, the passage into the tomb. And that is underscoring something very important right above that lintel stone, and that is the roof box, a term given to it by Professor O'Kelly when he discovered it during excavations in the 1960s. And that is a slit or a slot opening. No other passage tomb in northwestern Europe has this. This makes Newgrange the standout tomb above all else. And its astronomical alignment on the rising sun at the winter solstice is the phenomenon for which Newgrange is so rightly famous. And when we look at the Newgrange construct, we see here a cutaway section of the architecture of the tomb, the corbel chamber, and the capstone at the summit. That's all covered by a massive cairn, of course, of nearly 90,000 cubic meters of material. And there you have the purple line showing you the sunbeam, the path of the beam into the chamber for a number of days. It's not a one-day wonder, Claire.
Yeah, I know.
Like, these things were made to endure over many days. And we can talk endlessly about the meaning of the role of the sun, the illumination of the interior. And here is this wonderful view captured by one of our cameras of the horizon in the distance through this roof box. And there is the in view.
Yeah.
And notice the decoration above the roof box. The specialness of this construct cannot be overemphasized.
An interesting thing that I'd like to draw our viewers' attention to is the doorway, which is completely blocked up with a wooden door. You can see that black door. If you just look to the right of the entrance, you can see there's a large stone slab, and it fits almost perfectly into that opening that of the doorway. When we were discussing last year how we would use the empty chamber to advance research into the winter solstice phenomenon, we decided we'd close off the entrance and block the doorway. So that wooden door mirrors the stone door that is in position to the right-hand side. So for the first time ever, our cameras are picking up the sunbeam inside the chamber as it was designed to be seen. So it's like as if we have a glimpse into the past. There's nobody in the chamber these mornings. There's just the cameras. So I wonder if the spirits of the ancestors are in there. They're just having a great old time saying, finally, we've got the place to ourselves again.
For sure, absolutely. In the distance, you see the horizon, the summit of Red Mountain.
Yeah.
Not so much a mountain, hardly a hill, and the place name is interesting. But nonetheless, it does stand out in the topography as an elevated piece of ground. And very conveniently on that horizon for us today, there are a number of trees in the distance which are distinctive and provide a lovely reference mark against which to mark the path of the sun changing daily.
There's a view of the valley that you don't often see. We have a camera right on top of the monument, and you can see the River Bóinne below us. It's about a kilometre from the monument down to the River Bóinne, but there's a series of terraces as you go down towards the Bóinne. So it doesn't appear as far when you're actually here, but it's a long way up when you're walking.
For sure.
Imagine if you were hauling a big stone with you coming up the hill.
Interestingly, the geology of the local landscape is limestone, and that was not a material used in the construction of the tombs, other than perhaps some of the water roll stones in the cairn. They've travelled far and wide to collect the special stones that are the feature of Newgrange. And there you see the floodplain below, and in that valley you have numerous evidences of archaeological structures, many of them subsurface, not visible from the surface, but detected by geophysics and other technologies.
And as we look out through the roof box, that view is framed by the roof box, but there's no break in the cloud, I'm afraid, this morning. So we still have, this is the time of sunrise, but the sky isn't clear, so we cannot see sun in the chamber. But we're part of the Newgrange experience, as I said earlier, waiting for the light and hoping and just being here.
One of the products of our research activity from last year has been the development of a new tool to visualize the phenomenon of sunrise in the landscape. And the development of what we call a landscape model for Newgrange in a free planetarium program called Stellarium. And the viewers can Google Newgrange and Stellarium, and they will be able to download all of this and be able to use it on their computer.
Yeah.
And what we have here is a simulation, speeded up, of the rising sun on the horizon in the landscape of the Bóinne Valley. And we have included label markers to orientate the viewer.
And then this is when you turn the clock back, which is my favourite part of this. Is when you can turn the clock back to 5,000 years ago, and you can see where the sun rose 5,000 years ago. And it's in a different position. It's more to the right than it is now. And that is you know the science. That's because the Earth's angle relative to the sun
Yes.
has changed in the
Yes,
last
yeah.
5,000 years. If we could see that whole sequence again,
Yes.
and just to let if we could see the stellarium sequence again, just to let our viewers enjoy the difference between and see the difference between sunrise now, which is the first one up.
To the left of those trees, just watch the horizon and that distinctive notch of trees. There we go. All due to the fact that the Earth is tilted on its axis relative to the plane of its orbit around the sun. And in 5,000 years, or going back to the Neolithic, there was about a half a degree difference in the tilt. That is enough to make the sun rise to the right of its present position.
Yeah, so here we are now 5,000 years ago.
Yeah.
Trees are still growing there.
And the shift is about 2 solar disks or diameters. There we go.
Yeah, I think that is really interesting. And it's funny, like when you're in that stellarium program,
Yes.
you can set the date to any date.
Any date,
So you can
yes.
see the night sky as it would have been in the time of Kublai Khan. You can see the night sky in the time of Henry VIII. Yes. You can see the night sky in the time of your own date of birth.
For sure.
And hopefully tonight will be clear and we'll be able to see in reality a
Yes.
full moon.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you think 5,000 years ago, if you had the winter solstice and a full moon on the same date, would that be significant? Do you think? Do you think they watched the moon?
Oh, most certainly they did.
Yeah.
And the primary cycle of the moon is the monthly phase cycle. That would have been understood as the fundamental unit of timekeeping. It is so easy to mark your time month on month according to the moon and the amount of shadow or fullness of the disk. So easy. So undoubtedly the moon was tracked and no doubt revered in its own way as well.
Yeah.
We have to postulate or speculate, you know, and that's the hard part.
Yeah.
Unlike in archaeology where you excavate and dig and you retrieve what we call material culture that you can get your hands on. And comparatively, that's easy to interpret in terms of how the pottery was used, for example, and other things as well. But when it comes to the meaning of monuments and the meaning of the sky, that's a much trickier field of inquiry.
But it's wonderful. Like, I mean, we've spent some nights under the night sky, and I also was here with Ken Williams, the photographer, at night. And it's a whole different experience to be at the monuments when the sky is full of stars. Yes. And we think now, we're in the countryside, and we can see the Milky Way above these monuments when we go out at night on a clear night. But the night sky 5,000 years ago must have been so much brighter.
For sure. And one of the dramatic figures that comes out of anybody interested in dark sky and dark sky protection is that today we can see perhaps a few hundred stars in a night sky. But in the Neolithic, when there was zero light pollution, other than the zodiacal light in the sky, 5,000 to 6,000 stars would have been visible.
So now, a starry night 5,000 years ago was a different experience than what we experience.
For sure, yeah. There are a few places in the world where you can go to. And certainly there are pockets of dark sky, quality dark skies in Ireland.
Yeah.
And we're now trying to conserve those and protect them and create the awareness.
Yeah.
And that's,
because it's so much part of our heritage, isn't it?
Oh, yes.
And we're not as inclined to celebrate it as much as we are the built monuments.
Yes.
But the way we look at the world is part of what we are too.
Yes.
And I think the idea of celebrating the winter solstice is very much part of the Irish tradition. When you think of people leaving lights on in the dark days so strangers could find their way. Yeah. And it's funny when you go back to the mythology associated with these monuments, it's often to do with time. And for the people who lived here 5,000 years ago, it must have seemed that the wise people of their community were actually able to control time. Yeah. And what an achievement that was, to be able to say to the people, gather here, bring the beer and the sandwiches. We're going to celebrate. The longest nights are nearly over. Yes. And people would have probably partied here for a week.
Yes.
Yeah.
I know. And now, you're so right there. Time was power. Yeah. particularly then. So control of time was power in itself. And that's manifested in the O'Kelly's discovery of quartz blocks, which were interpreted as being, they only found 2 of them, I think, out of perhaps a few more, that the slot opening, the roof box, was in fact ritually sealed by quartz blocks and perhaps opened again to allow the light in at particular times, like winter solstice. They know that because there are scratch marks on the stones above and below where these quartz blocks were inserted.
So it would have been repeated
A
year
repeated
on year on
ritual,
year.
absolutely.
I wonder, 5,000 years ago, did people go inside the chamber to see the sun? Or were they a very select few who would see the sun? Or did they leave the sun for the ancestors?
A bit of both, I suspect.
Yeah.
A bit. Now here we're speculating.
I know, but it's great to have the stellarium and be able to get a glimpse into the past. And it's great to have our doorways sealed and get another glimpse into the past. But wouldn't it be fantastic if we got a time machine and just stood here and watched what happened? For some of our visitors who haven't been here for a while, and the chamber has been closed for nearly 2 years now, we'd love to bring you on a little tour of the inside, just so that you can see the wonders that are inside the chamber. This is the basin stone in the right-hand recess, taken from above. The upper stone is made of granite, which was an extremely hard stone. This is the basin stone in the left-hand recess, and these stones held the cremated remains of the dead. And inside, deep in the heart of the chamber, is the most famous piece of prehistoric art from Western Europe, the tri-spiral. Often imitated, but this is the original. And then the passage is very narrow, but halfway up the passage you have this extraordinary stone too. And then you go into the chamber and look up and see the cathedral-like roof. And then some of the stone, this is Kerbstone 52, at the back of the monument.
That's a special stone insofar as it's diametrically opposite the entrance curbstone, right at the back. And both the entrance curbstone K1 and this particular one, K52, has a vertical groove running down across the face of the stone from top to bottom. That repeats over at Nouth as well, interestingly, on both entrance curbstones. We don't quite know the significance or the meaning of that line. But if you join K1 at the front of Newgrange and K52 at the back, that line creates a kind of axis that goes straight down the passage, straight through the burial chamber, and out through the back of the monument. So architecturally, they were laying down, in a sense, a template, a design. This was all foreplanned and forethought.
So the very first thing these people would have done when they were designing their monument was sending their astronomers out to sit on this hill, which is the highest point within the bend of the river, and to decide and get right exactly where the sun rose at the winter solstice, because they were going to control and impress with this monument. So those 2 stones would probably have been first in position, do you think?
Very conceivably, or at least marks to indicate where they would go. And again, we don't know. But certainly the design was thought out carefully. And what's important about the location of nearly all of our passage tombs, not all of them, but the majority, is vantage. They chose elevated ground, locally high ground, to situate their most impressive monuments. And in a sense, that's extending the idea of time and power. Because if you're on a summit, you are, in a sense, given command of everything you see before you in the landscape. And you are looking down on everything else. So there's a kind of hierarchy going on in terms of the symbolism of how these monuments were placed.
And Newgrange is so high, even though it's not physically very high, it stands above the landscape. And when we're in the visitor centre on these mornings around this time of the year, and on a clear morning when the sky is bright and we can watch the sunrise from the visitor centre across the valley, it's absolutely fantastic to see the mound of Newgrange lit up before anything else. And the quartz that's on the outside just glows in the morning sun.
Sure.
And it's interesting that they faced the monument with quartz. It's all the quartz that's on the monument now has been restored after the O'Kelly excavations, but all of the stone that's on the outside of the monument is the original stone. And it's funny that the Irish word for quartz is green cloch, and in Irish tradition, quartz is called na clocha gialla, the shining stones.
Yes.
And you can see when the sun shines on Newgrange why they chose it, because it just gives it this extra luminosity.
And the visibility from afar would have been a standout in terms of the usage of white quartz to dress and adorn the monuments. Not all of them have it,
No?
but there is extensive evidence of the
Yeah.
use of quartz in so many contexts
Yeah.
in an archaeological sense.
Yeah. When I think of Lough Crew, another place we go to,
Yeah.
and its Irish name is Cairn Bóinne, which is the white cairn. And when Conwell investigated Lough Crew, he said there was still 2 feet of quartz in a wall right around the monument.
And they travelled far to get this stone.
Yeah,
As I said earlier, the stone that's resident here is lower Carboniferous limestone.
yeah.
That was not used. So
They went
distance was no problem to them. Well,
No,
it probably
no.
was a great difficulty.
Yeah, but it was part of the power as well.
It was,
Yeah.
yeah. And to
just-
know where to go
Yeah.
to get these special stones. They went up to Dundalk Bay, they went
Yeah.
to Clogher Head, and they went to Wicklow. And the Wicklow Hills, Dublin Mountains, 50 kilometres away.
And they would have had to bring it by boat
Yes.
up along the Irish Sea,
Yep.
then up along the river. And
Yeah.
as we said earlier, it's a good kilometre from
Yeah.
here. Just looking at the clock and looking at the sky, it's not looking very hopeful that we'll see sun. But we would love to share with you some photographs that were taken last Christmas Eve but I think it was the most extraordinary display of sunlight that we got last year. And these photographs were taken by the very talented photographer John Lawler, and the camera is positioned on the top of the chamber looking down on the floor. I think if we could see that piece of footage again from the beginning, so that we can draw people's attention, please, to, first of all, what we call the ambient light, which is the path that the sunlight is projected onto. So that's what we call the ambient light. Now look very carefully at the lower edge of it, and that's the first beam of direct sunlight. And then watch as it grows, stretches and recedes. And take note of just how bright it gets. It's as if the sun itself has been captured within the monument.
The whole architecture of the tomb is revealed by the direct beam and the illumination that you get from it.
And what I think is extraordinary, we would never have had the opportunity of taking that photograph, only that the pandemic came and the chamber was closed and we were able to block the door. So out of all adversity, there comes an opportunity. And we should always think about not about what we cannot do, but what we can do and what we can celebrate even out of adversity. So that's our prize, that wonderful piece of
We had
photography.
a multidisciplinary team, which was an extraordinary range of skills and talents, led by our Chief State Archaeologist, Michael McDonough. And then we had Claire Breen, who's the archaeologist for the Bóinne Valley. We had Sinead Gargan, who's the Chief Architect for OPW. We had John Lawler, who was the Senior Photographer. And then yourself. And in all of that project, we have now published in the current edition of Archaeology Ireland. And there is a photograph on the cover, which is truly spectacular.
Now there we are looking in from the roof box up along the passage, and it's very grey. But hopefully, this time tomorrow, it'll be flooded with light. Within the Bóinne Valley, this is not the only monument that has a winter solstice alignment.
No.
Our tradition here has been to come to Newgrange for sunrise and then head off to Douth on the afternoon of December 21st for sunset. Douth is probably the least well known of the three great monuments of Brú na Bóinne. This aerial shot shows you the bend of the Bóinne and brings us back to the river, which is so important. All of these monuments, the World Heritage Site is located within a bend of the River Bóinne. And you have the three big monuments, Nowth, Newgrange and Douth. So this is a view of Douth. The hollow on top of Douth is a result of quarrying that took place in the 1800s. It has never been excavated, but it was investigated and written about by the O'Kellys in the 1970s. And this is Douth South, which is quite a big chamber with a one-side recess. And these huge stones, the basin stone that you see here is actually from Douth North. And the art at Douth, which you can see some of here, it's not quite as sophisticated as the art at Newgrange and Nowth, but it's still got a great lovely quality to it. And here we are, and a lovely photograph by Ken Williams again, of us gathered in the chamber at Douth for sunset on December 21st. And I always think, and I've said this to you before, Frank, the difference in the atmosphere between being at Newgrange for dawn and being at Douth for sunset.
Yes.
Newgrange is serious enough, you know, that we take it very seriously and we enjoy being here and we feel the weight of the millennia on us. But by the time we get to Douth, on the afternoon of we have this kind of celebratory feel and everybody's talking and laughing and joking. I think it's because we can get so many people into the chamber at Douth. And I just always think it's such a different atmosphere to the atmosphere at Newgrange. And I have no doubt in my mind that 5,000 years ago, when they got to the end of the day, they were also ready to celebrate that the longest night was over.
I often think that the term midwinter solstice is a little bit of a misnomer. I prefer winter solstice because if you think about the year climatically, we've a bit to go before we hit winter. It hasn't really got going here yet.
Yeah.
So to say today is midwinter does not sit easily with me.
When you think about the cold days of January and February, but it's the knowledge that the days are getting longer, I think, which is
correct.
What we need.
Yeah.
That even though we have to face into hard times yet, there is an end in sight and we can look forward. I was talking earlier about the landscape and how important the River Bóinne is to this area. And we have some wonderful, you were talking about the science, the LiDAR study of our landscape here is just shows every detail because it strips off all of the fences and the trees. So here it is. Maybe you'd talk us through this, Frank.
We use the acronym LIDAR. That's light detection and radar and ranging. And it's a survey mapping tool, which has revolutionized how we create our maps these days. And what you see there is what's called a bare earth model, stripped away of its vegetation. So what you see is the strata. And my good friend, the geologist Robert Meehan, when he saw this recently, he said, you can almost taste and feel the ice age has just gone from it. And looking at that model, if we look at geological time, the bedrocks were created millions of years ago. But the ice age only ended as recently as about 12,000 years back. And it is the ice age which has given us much of the landforms that you see here in terms of the soils, the gravels, and the erosion. And the model itself, when you go back to the LIDAR model, it shows the bend in the Bóinne beautifully. And if we could just return to that model there, you can see on the left-hand side, the river is coming in from the top left and then loops dramatically down southwards around the bottom and up to the top and out again to the right towards the coast. And on the summit of the ridges, you can pick out the cairns of Nowth, Dowth and Newgrange. And look how their vantage is so well shown in that model. They chose these locations deliberately for view and setting and command of the landscape beneath them and around them.
Professor Frank Mitchell, who worked at these monuments for many, many years, he coined the phrase, the inland island of the bend of the Bóinne. And he always said, it must have seemed to the people who lived here 5,000 years ago that this was an area naturally set apart because we have the sacred river flowing on three sides of us and then a tributary of the River Bóinne, the River Mattock, on the north side. So the people who farmed here 5,000 years ago, they looked at the landscape when they wanted to choose a place for their ancestors and a place to gather. And they said, this is a special place because the river has set it apart. And then within the bend of the Bóinne, you have these three hills, as you said, and they picked the highest one for Newgrange. And then over, just as the bend starts, there's Nowth with its commanding view down over the valley, looking towards Slane. And we think it's the centre of the universe. And I'm sure 5,000 years ago, it was the centre of their world.
I would never argue with you, Claire, on that.
Yeah, but we love the beauty of the Bóinne Valley. It's not as dramatic a landscape as you get in other places in Ireland, but it's the rich texture of the landscape and the number of heritage sites that we have here, which makes it such a wonderful place to live and to visit.
Our dear colleague Geraldine Stout, Dr. Geraldine Stout, who recently retired. Congratulations, Geraldine. And her investment in the knowledge that we have today of the Bóinne Valley in numerous publications by Geraldine. They are fantastic. Yeah. And one of her theories, and I'm sure it's correct, is that much of the materiality that made up this monument was brought in and up the River Bóinne as a sort of avenue for getting close to the tomb and then bringing or hauling these stones right up that slope. And it is a big slope. Yeah. So the community effort to drag and roll, however they did it, these enormous stones to the summit of the ridge and put them into position is just an incredible thought. And we can speculate on the population and the size of community that were here at that time, but it has to be many thousands.
Yeah. And to get them all to work together, probably in the summer months they would have.
Oh, I've no doubt.
Yeah. We just see a few people waiting still.
Earlier, you referred to the, the investment in the monuments and how they built them. And when you think about these megaliths, big stones, they had permanence. They were designed to last and outlive, and also perhaps to be a monument to the spirits of the dead interred within, which in their worldview probably would last forever in terms of the residing within the monument. So that permanence of stone is there and has given us the legacy of what we now have today.
Yeah.
Whereas the timber houses where people lived, they've long since gone.
Yeah.
And it's only by accidental discoveries, especially with infrastructural projects, that we discover the foundations of these, what are in the Neolithic, rectangular structures, comfortably built.
Yeah.
These were comfortable houses.
Oh, anybody who can build monuments on this scale knew how to build a house and keep it warm and keep it dry.
Yeah. If you go to the Ferry Carrig in Wexford,
Yeah.
where they have reconstructed a Neolithic house or two,
Yeah.
you can actually go in and enjoy and experience what a Neolithic dwelling would have been like.
Yeah. And our colleague, Jessica, she spent a long time studying Neolithic houses.
She's the expert.
She is indeed.
Yeah.
She is indeed.
And the number of Neolithic houses to date is tiny, minuscule, compared to what must have existed. We know now of only about 120. And the publication on the one of the motorway projects is about to publish, a map of the latest discoveries of timber Neolithic houses. And the number has gone up to about 120. Still infinitesimally small.
Yeah, towards what there must be.
Yeah.
And it just, I suppose it shows us all that you can leave a mark. All the people who live, you can build something and it'll last forever. And then millennia can pass without any trace being left of our existence. But these monuments were built to last.
Yes.
And they endure. And even though we didn't see the sun this morning, we know that the longest days, the longest nights are almost over. And we look forward to being here over the next couple of days, and hopefully we'll get sun on some of the mornings.
We will, for sure.
I think if we just take a view through the roof box before we leave our viewers this morning, and just to look at the horizon and just wait and look.
And I think tomorrow's winter solstice, the notional day of winter solstice, you can expect many hundreds here.
Well, we don't know what to expect, really. People, I think, are still a bit reluctant to go out, but it's nice to have somebody here to keep us company.
What you see in the foreground there is one of the monoliths of what Professor O'Kelly called the Great Circle. And there are 12 stones in that monument which surround or in a sense enclose the passage tomb. They were built later, probably late Neolithic, early Bronze Age. David Sweetman is the archaeologist who conducted excavations and discovered and was able to date the circle itself. And their positioning is no accident. You can see how architecturally the symbolism of the monument and the passage tomb now flows out into a later built construct known as the Great Circle of Standing Stone. Not quite a circle, but we won't worry about that.
Don't worry about
it. It is their position and their stature and their function.
So, thank you all for joining us this morning. We're delighted with your company. We hope that you'll come back and join us tomorrow morning when hopefully we'll have better skies and a clearer horizon. On behalf of the Office of Public Works and the National Monument Service of the Department of Housing, Local Government and Heritage, I'd like to thank you all for being with us this morning, for keeping vigil while we waited for the light. And from Newgrange this morning, a very good morning.